Good evening, my name is Joshua Dacey and I'm the exhibitions manager here at AVA in Lebanon, New Hampshire. Today I am sitting with Debra Claffey. She is one of our featured artists this month here in our galleries. And just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history.
Oh, thanks. It's a kind of funny story where my husband is a musician, so we don't have a big cash flow. And we asked a realtor to find us a house, and the radius, we were in Boston, and the radius got larger and larger and larger. We finally found the place we liked, and it was in New Boston, and it was a good hour and a half out of Boston. But we have 5 acres of woods and a little barn that used to be a horse barn that I turned into my studio. And I've been painting there since 1992. I'm a latecomer to art. I didn't start till I was 30. I went back to school, to the museum school in the early 80s. I was close to 30 and decided that I wanted to be a painter. Started then. I'd never been a child that drew and painted all day long. So at the museum school, right after we graduated, I got a space in Jamaica Plain in an old brewery building that had 12-foot ceilings. And I've been painting ever since. And then we moved into Boston. I brought all the paintings up with me and started to notice that the subject was changing. I had been doing jazz musicians and my husband's piano trios and his groups, and that the paintings were all about music and rhythm and syncopation and visual color. And then, let's see, I went to University of New Hampshire to get a degree in horticulture because I had been working freelance as an office manager for landscape designers, and I caught the bug for plants and landscape design, and then I got into organic land care. And at the time I was keeping all of this separate. I was keeping the people who I was working with the plants didn't know I was painting, and the people I knew from art and painting didn't know I was working in horticulture. And somebody said to me at some point, why are you keeping them separate? And so then the plants kind of worked their way into the paintings. I think one of the closest things to truth is the kind of music that the country's famous for, the jazz, the American jazz, and the whole notion of syncopation, that little bit of awkwardness or wryness or offbeat that makes it alive. And that when things get very regular, they become static and kind of still. And there's sometimes there can be a serenity and some peace in that, but the real liveliness and the kind of growth that you see in fractals and chaos theory, all of that is related to syncopated rhythms. And so I find it in the music. I find my inspiration in the music and in the way plants grow and the fractal geometry in our nature. And I tend to see it all as one. So.
And can you talk to us about the medium? This is called encaustics, correct?
It's encaustic plus mixed media. So I'm using encaustic paint as one of several media. I like to work on paper. Paper is an integral part of a lot of the pieces. I love oil paints, so I have been combining oil paints and the paper and my love of drawing and the encaustic and working with layers. Layers and layers and layers.
Well, this piece certainly has a lot of layers.
A lot of layers.
And it's called Monk's Dream, right?
Yeah, that's a reference to Thelonious Monk, which is one of my favorite jazz musicians.
Can you walk us through how this started? What do you start with? Is it one big thing that you cut up, or is it a bunch of little things that you weave together?
In some pieces I start with oil paints. And in this case, it was a drawing that I had done on printmaking paper ages ago. And I had been storing it. I pulled it out of storage. And then I covered over it completely. So you can barely see that underneath, I don't know if you can see, underneath there is a jazz band, drums, bass player, pianist. And then I covered the whole thing over with a transparent color, this kind of bluish. And then I draw into it and add, so the leaves and the foliage and the plant life, that's the encaustic part. And I like it, I like the modular because it feels like you're working with a grid and breaking up a grid at the same time, and it makes it lightweight and portable and easy to carry around, which is no small matter at this age.
Caustic? Can you tell us?
And caustic is beeswax with pigment and a little bit of resin in it, the Damar resin. It makes the paint a little bit stronger because beeswax is very soft. It has to be molten when you put it on, and as soon as it cools, you can keep going. And you don't have to wait for oil colors to dry, except when you're using oil paints underneath. I like it because not only can you put on lots of layers quickly, they can be transparent layers, they can be opaque layers, and you can carve back into it. You'll see that a lot of this drawing is actually carving where I've gone back in. And then you can use the oil paints to fill in what you've carved out and put tone on over the wax and color into the mark making, or you can use that carving to reveal a color that's underneath. So there are lots and lots of options, lots of ways to work with it, so it's never boring.
Wonderful. So when people come and view your work here at AVA, what do you hope that it does for them? Is it catharsis? Is it inspiration?
It's inspiration, and it's I'd like them to feel a little bit more connection with plants. My feeling is that plants are very intelligent beings. They're sentient. They've been around for eons, longer than we have on the planet. They've developed communication and marketplaces and ways to attract us and to repel us and to attract pollinators and to repel pests, and they talk to each other. And I found that all out while I was studying for the horticulture degree and realized that most people don't know about fungi communication networks between trees, you know, in the ways that the trees get an increased root area and access to water, and the fungi get sugars in this little trade-off marketplace that goes on all around us, and we have no clue what's going on. So if you get some joy from the kind of music and the rhythm and the colors that I'm using, maybe it helps you appreciate plants a little more. And I've just started recently teaching, so it's made me more cognizant of how I choose the colors, and that there is a system underneath where you mix colors with each other so that you get a harmonious palette together, so that they work together, but you may not be consciously thinking that, oh, I'm going to mix this, and that color together. That part's intuitive while I'm working. So sometimes the pieces decide what that's going to be. If I'm layering monotypes, like in the piece in the back, then the print colors kind of choose the palette and what needs to be accented or drawn in around. And the bigger ones, I was looking for contrast, you know, and brightness. They kind of pop. But my favorite part about them is the drawing. It's the edges and the contours and the carving and the ribbing and the leaf. I think that's what gives it the motion, you know, and a certain freedom, looseness. I'm not trying to redepict what's in front of me. I'm trying to get at the feeling of the plants, the life, the liveliness. I have a south-facing wall that is, you can't see out the windows because it's just a whole wall of plants. And they come out in the summertime, and I actually have some room to paint, and they come back in the fall. But they pose for me, and they let me borrow leaves to print. And there's a lot of the smaller pieces are actually printed from the actual leaf. I ink up the leaf and take an impression off of it. But it's done with permission. So it's part of a bigger picture. I'm an organic land care provider. I'm trying to get people away from pesticides and into caring for the soil and the life in the soil, and then if you take care of that, everything else takes care of itself. At the same time that I want them to appreciate more plant life on the planet and how it's an integral part of who we are on the planet, and that it's all of us. So if we're chopping down trees, we're hurting ourselves. And I don't know, we have a long way to go, but it's my little piece, my little contribution.
I think that's all, Deborah, and I just
Thank
want to
you,
thank you for being
Joshua.
with us here
Oh,
tonight.
I love it.
And anybody can come down to AVA in Lebanon, and you can see Deborah's wonderful work.
Please come.